We do not know when it will be safe to go outside.
For 3 seasons, Silo has quietly encouraged us to ask one question: what destroyed the world? Was it nuclear war? Environmental collapse? A chemical catastrophe? Every clue we've uncovered seems to point towards some unimaginable disaster that forced humanity underground. But what if we've been asking the wrong question from the very beginning?
We do not know who built the silo.
What if the real mystery isn't who launched the first attack, but who spent decades preparing for it? Think about everything we've learned so far. 50 enormous underground silos.
The founders didn't build a single silo. They built 50.
Technically 51.
A civilization designed to survive for centuries. An algorithm capable of governing generations of people who would never even meet the men and women who created it. Memory suppression sophisticated enough to erase dangerous truths. The safeguard waiting silently in the background as the ultimate insurance policy. None of those things can be built overnight. None of them are emergency solutions. They're the result of years, perhaps decades, of planning. And that's the detail that changes everything. Because if the founders had enough time to create all of this before the world ended, then they almost certainly knew the end was coming. The terrifying possibility is that they didn't simply survive humanity's greatest catastrophe. They built an entirely new civilization around it. And if that's true, then the apocalypse wasn't just the end of the old world. It may have been the beginning of the founders' plan. Stay with me until the very end, because the final piece of this theory completely changes the meaning of the silos themselves and raises the unsettling possibility that humanity wasn't saved at all. Humanity was selected. Before we uncover one of the darkest possibilities in Silo, do me one quick favor. If YouTube's algorithm hasn't already decided this theory contains classified information from Silo 1, hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, it helps the channel grow, and unlike the founders, I'm not asking you to spend the next 352 years living underground to support it. And seriously, don't click away halfway through this video. Every clue we're about to examine builds toward one conclusion, and without the final connection, this theory sounds impossible. By the end, though, you'll understand why the biggest secret in Silo may have been hiding in plain sight since episode 1. Let's quickly rewind. From the very first episode, Silo presented itself as a mystery about survival. The people underground believed the surface was poisoned. Every law, every tradition, and every punishment existed to preserve humanity against a hostile world. Anyone who questioned that reality became dangerous. Anyone who searched for forbidden knowledge risked exile. Or worse. Naturally, we accepted the show's central premise. Something catastrophic happened. Humanity built the silos. The founders became heroes because they saved what was left of civilization. It's a simple story, and for a long time it seemed convincing. But the deeper the series goes, the more that explanation begins to fall apart. Because the founders didn't just prepare for a disaster, they prepared for centuries of life after it. Think about the scale of what they accomplished. Building one underground city would already rank among the greatest engineering projects in human history. Now multiply that by 50 independent ecosystems. 50 massive structures capable of supporting thousands of people for generations. Water systems, air filtration, agriculture, power production, medical facilities, manufacturing, education, waste recycling, communication infrastructure. Every single component had to function long after the people who designed it were gone. That's not something a frightened government throws together after seeing explosions on the horizon. That's something planned years in advance with extraordinary resources, political influence, and unwavering confidence that the investment would eventually become necessary. Now ask yourself the question the show quietly avoids asking. If the founders possessed the intelligence, technology, and resources required to build 50 self-sustaining underground civilizations, why weren't those same resources used to prevent the catastrophe in the first place? That's a question the series keeps circling without directly answering, because stopping the end of the world would have required global cooperation, scientific innovation, and immense funding, the very things the founders clearly possessed. Yet instead of investing everything into saving civilization as it existed, they invested everything into preserving a small fraction of it beneath the earth. Why? That single question transforms the founders from heroes into something much more complicated. Imagine knowing that civilization is heading toward disaster. Imagine having access to governments, corporations, military leaders, and scientists capable of changing history. Most people would dedicate every available resource to preventing the collapse. They'd negotiate peace, develop new technology, search for solutions. But the founders appear to have taken a completely different approach. Instead of stopping the future, they built a backup copy of humanity, almost as though they had already accepted that the old world couldn't, or shouldn't, be saved. And that's where this theory truly begins. Because preparation tells us something prediction never can. Anyone can predict disaster. Historians, scientists, military analysts, and economists make frightening predictions all the time. Most never come true. But preparation is different. Preparation costs money. Preparation requires commitment. Preparation demands sacrifice. You don't spend decades excavating underground cities because you have a bad feeling about the future. You do it because you possess information convincing enough to justify one of the largest construction projects humanity has ever attempted. The founders didn't act like people hoping disaster could be avoided. They acted like people already certain it couldn't. Or perhaps, people who were certain it wouldn't. That's an uncomfortable distinction, but it's one worth thinking about. Because throughout Season 3, the story has slowly shifted away from asking what happened outside and toward asking who designed everything inside. Every new revelation moves our attention away from the apocalypse itself and toward the architecture of control that followed it, the algorithm, the memory program, the safeguard, judicial authority, the pact. These weren't desperate inventions created after civilization collapsed. They were foundational systems woven into the silos from the very beginning, which means someone wasn't merely planning to survive the end of the world. Someone was planning to govern the survivors. And those are two completely different goals. Now let's talk about the one invention that completely changes how we should look at the founders, the memory program. Out of everything they created, this may be the hardest to justify if their only goal was survival. Think about it. Clean water makes sense. Air filtration makes sense. Food production, medical technology, power generation. Every one of those systems exists because people need them to stay alive. But memory suppression is different. You don't erase history because people need it to breathe. You erase history because people knowing it becomes dangerous. That immediately raises another question. Dangerous to whom? If the founders truly wanted future generations to rebuild civilization, why make sure those generations never understood the civilization that came before them? Why allow children to grow up without knowing what the sky really looked like, how the old world functioned, or even why the silos were created in the first place? Those aren't survival decisions, those are control decisions. And that distinction changes everything. The more you examine the silos, the more they resemble carefully designed social experiments instead of emergency shelters. Every citizen is born into the same structure. Every generation receives the same carefully limited education. Curiosity is discouraged. Forbidden knowledge is punished. Relics from the old world are treated like dangerous weapons instead of historical artifacts. The system doesn't merely protect people from the outside, it protects itself from the inside. That's a fascinating difference because a civilization focused on rebuilding would encourage learning. It would preserve history so future generations could avoid repeating past mistakes. The silos do the exact opposite. They deliberately erase context until people no longer know enough to question the rules they're living under. That isn't how you prepare humanity for a better future. It's how you create a population that accepts the present without asking who designed it. Then there's the algorithm itself. At first, it seems like the logical evolution of the founders' plan. A sophisticated intelligence capable of balancing resources, predicting shortages, preventing panic, and coordinating dozens of independent silos sounds incredibly practical during a global catastrophe. But the deeper the story goes, the less the algorithm behaves like a survival tool, and the more it behaves like the guardian of a philosophy. It doesn't simply protect lives, it protects a way of life. Whenever the truth threatens the stability of the system, the algorithm consistently chooses stability. It allows memories to disappear. It supports impossible secrets. It tolerates sacrifices that no human leader would willingly celebrate. Over hundreds of years, its priorities appear to have shifted from preserving humanity to preserving the structure humanity lives inside. And once that shift happens, the silos stop being shelters. They become institutions designed to outlive the people they were built to protect. That brings us to one of the biggest clues hidden in plain sight: the safeguard. The very name sounds reassuring, but safeguarding what? Most viewers naturally assume it's safeguarding humanity. But every time we hear about systems designed to maintain order at all costs, the wording becomes incredibly important. The safeguard doesn't appear to exist because every individual life matters equally. It exists because the continuation of the overall project matters above everything else. That's a philosophy, not just a protocol. It suggests that if protecting the project requires sacrificing an entire silo, the system is willing to make that choice. That's not the thinking of frightened survivors desperately trying to keep the human race alive. That's the thinking of planners who believe the mission itself is more valuable than the people currently carrying it out. Now imagine being one of the original founders. You genuinely believe civilization is collapsing. You decide that humanity's only chance lies underground. You build the silos. You create an algorithm to manage them. But then another question appears. What happens after you're gone? Future generations might disagree with your methods. They might abandon your rules. They might open the doors too early. They might reject the sacrifices you considered necessary. So how do you prevent that? You don't simply write instructions, because instructions can be ignored. You create systems that shape every generation from birth. You control education, you control history, you control memory. Eventually, people stop obeying because they understand the rules. They obey because they can't imagine another way to live. That's far more powerful than any army could ever be. This is why I don't believe the greatest mystery in Silo is who launched the first bomb, or who released the first deadly toxin. Those questions matter, but they may not be the questions the writers want us to focus on. Instead, the story keeps pointing us towards something far more unsettling. Who benefited from a world where only 50 carefully selected populations survived? Because that's exactly what happened. Billions of people disappeared. A tiny fraction endured. The survivors lived under systems created long before they were born, guided by rules they never agreed to, and watched over by an intelligence they never elected. Whether the founders caused the catastrophe or simply anticipated it, the outcome is remarkably similar. They became the architects of humanity's future. And then Juliet enters the picture, and suddenly the entire plan begins to unravel. Notice what makes Juliet different from nearly everyone else we've met. She isn't satisfied with replacing one leader with another. She keeps asking why the system exists at all. Every answer she receives leads to another question. Every hidden room reveals another hidden layer. Every lie points toward an even older lie beneath it. That's exactly why she's so dangerous. The algorithm can manage predictable rebellion. It can prepare for people who break rules, but someone questioning the foundation of the entire system is much harder to contain because those questions spread. Once one person asks why history was erased, another asks who erased it. Then someone else asks what they were trying to hide. Before long, curiosity becomes impossible to control, which brings us back to the founders themselves. History often remembers them as visionaries who saved humanity from extinction. But what if that's only half the story? What if they didn't simply build shelters beneath the earth? What if they also built the narrative that future generations would believe about why those shelters existed? That's a much more enduring form of power. Winning a war gives you control for years. Controlling history gives you influence for centuries. If the founders shaped not only the physical world inside the silos, but also the stories people told about that world, then they've continued governing long after their deaths. In many ways, they've become more powerful than kings because their authority is no longer tied to a single person. It's embedded inside the culture itself. And maybe that's the darkest secret Season 3 has been quietly building toward. The apocalypse wasn't merely the event that forced humanity underground. It became the perfect foundation for a new civilization where questioning authority could always be dismissed as a threat to survival. Fear became the glue holding everything together. Every generation inherited that fear without ever knowing where it truly came from. But fear only works as long as people believe it's protecting them. The moment someone proves that fear has been protecting something else instead, the entire structure begins to crack. If Juliet uncovers that truth, and if the remaining pieces of the Founder's original plan finally come into the light, then the biggest revelation in Silo won't be the cause of the apocalypse. It will be that the future of humanity was designed long before the world ever ended.